to send military forces into Nigeria unless the government stops what he called the killings of Christians by terrorists. Trump posted the message on Truth Social, saying the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists, he says, who are committing these horrible atrocities.
The rain came down hard on the tarmac outside Madeira Air Base, drumming against steel and concrete like an approaching army. Floodlights cut through the darkness as a massive, unmarked cargo aircraft rolled to a stop. No flags, no insignia, just matte gray metal and silence. Nigerian soldiers watched from a distance, rifles slung low, their faces unreadable. Phones had been confiscated hours earlier. Even the base commander had received his orders verbally. No paper trail, no emails, no signatures. When the cargo door opened, the air seemed to change. Men stepped out wearing known national patches, their movements precise, disciplined, almost rehearsed. They spoke little, communicating with glances and hand signals. Heavy crates followed, sealed, scanned, and moved quickly into waiting trucks. The operation lasted less than 20 minutes. By the time the rain slowed, the aircraft was already lifting back into the clouds. Somewhere deep inside Nigeria's security architecture, a line had been crossed. And thousands of miles away, in Washington, alarms were just beginning to scream. For more than a decade, Nigeria had been fighting shadows. Terror cells that melted into forests and villages. Insurgents who struck at night and vanished by morning. Each year brought new promises from foreign partners, training programs, equipment deliveries, intelligence sharing. Each year, the violence adapted and survived. Civilians paid the price. Soldiers grew tired. Commanders learned to expect press releases instead of victories. Behind closed doors in Abuja, frustration had hardened into something sharper. The meeting took place beneath the Capitol, in a windowless room built during another era of fear. The walls were thick, the lights dim. Around the table sat men and women who had seen too many casualty reports and too many funerals. Maps of the Northeast glowed on digital screens, red markers pulsing where attacks had happened only days earlier. "We are fighting with one hand tied," one general said, his voice low. "And the other hand is being held by people who don bleed when we bleed." No one disagreed. A civilian advisor cleared her throat. "We asked for satellite access. They delayed. We asked for real-time intelligence. They filtered it. We asked for autonomy. They warned us about consequences." A silence followed. Heavy, expectant. Then the president spoke. Not loudly, not angrily, but with finality. "What if we stop asking?" The question lingered in the air like smoke. Weeks earlier, a quiet channel had opened, so quiet that only 3 people knew it existed. It began with a cultural attaché in a neutral capital, continued through encrypted messages, and ended with a face-to-face meeting in a private room overlooking a frozen river. No flags there either. Just tea, careful words, and an understanding that neither side would pretend this was about charity. Moscow did not arrive with speeches about democracy or press conferences about values. It arrived with lists, needs, capabilities, costs. "We do not fight your war," the Russian envoy had said calmly. "We help you end it. The rest is your decision." That was the difference. No lectures, no timelines tied to elections elsewhere, no media strategy baked into military cooperation. Just cold, transactional clarity. Back in Nigeria, the first effects were invisible to the public. Patterns shifted. Supply lines feeding insurgent camps began to collapse. Communications went dark at unexpected moments. Raids happened faster, cleaner, with fewer ambushes. Nigerian units started moving with confidence they hadn't felt in years, as if someone had finally turned on the lights in a familiar room. In Washington, analysts noticed the change before journalists did. A junior intelligence officer flagged it first. "Sir, something's different," she said, pointing to a screen filled with intercepted chatter. "Response times are down. Their counter-operations are anticipatory." Her supervisor frowned. "Run it again." They did. And again. The pattern held. Within days, the issue reached a level where voices dropped and doors closed. Screens showed satellite images, timelines, and probability curves. One name kept appearing in the margins of reports, never in bold, never officially acknowledged, but impossible to ignore. "Are they really doing this?" someone asked. A senior official leaned back, jaw tight. If they are, it's worse than we thought. Publicly, the tone remained calm. Statements were issued about partnership, shared goals, and ongoing cooperation. Privately, cables flew. Ambassadors were summoned. Warnings were drafted, softened, rewritten, then sharpened again. A call went through to Abuja. "We're concerned," the voice said carefully. "There are rumors." The reply was polite, non-committal. "Nigeria values all its partners," it said, "and Nigeria values results." The line went dead. Western media took longer to catch on, but when it did, the pivot was swift. Headlines appeared overnight, heavy with implication and fear. Anonymous sources spoke of destabilizing influences. Think pieces warned of new Cold Wars and dangerous experiments. NGOs released reports filled with cautious language that somehow always pointed in the same direction. In newsrooms, editors debated framing. Was this a security story? A democracy story? A human rights story? Angle it as concern, one editor said. Make it about influence. But the attacks are down, a younger reporter noted. Civilians, that's not the point, the editor snapped. The point is who's winning. On the ground in Nigeria, winning suddenly mattered more than perception. Markets reopened in towns that had been ghosted by fear. Farmers returned to fields they'd abandoned years ago. Soldiers spoke quietly among themselves about new tactics, about intelligence that felt alive instead of stale. They didn't know where it came from. They only knew it worked. In Moscow, the operation barely made the evening news. There were no speeches, no declarations, just another folder added to a shelf, another line item in a broader strategy that stretched far beyond one country or one conflict. "Let them shout," one strategist said, sipping black coffee. "Noise is how they hide panic." The panic was real. In Washington, pressure mounted to do something. Sanctions were discussed, then shelved. Threats of aid suspension were floated, then reconsidered. Each option carried risks. Push too hard, and Nigeria might push back harder. Say too little, and others might follow. Because everyone was watching. From Dakar to Addis Ababa, capitals took note. Not of Russia, necessarily, but of Nigeria's choice. Of the fact that a major African power had acted without asking permission, had diversified its alliances, had prioritized security over approval. That scared people more than tanks or troops ever could. A covert attempt was made to regain influence. A delegation arrived under the banner of dialogue, armed with proposals and thinly veiled warnings. They were received cordially, served excellent food, and listened to politely. Then they left with nothing. "The ground has shifted," one diplomat admitted on the flight home, "and we didn't feel it move." As the months passed, the terror groups adapted again, as they always did. But this time, their adaptations were anticipated. Camps were discovered before they were fully built. Leaders vanished in the night. Funding streams dried up under pressure no one publicly claimed responsibility for. The war was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt winnable. Late one night, in that same underground room in Abuja, the leadership gathered again. The maps showed progress. Not victory, but momentum. "There will be consequences," someone said quietly. The president nodded. "There always are." Outside, the city slept, unaware of how close it had come to being a pawn forever, unaware of how many invisible lines had been crossed in silence. Across the ocean, in offices lit long after midnight, people stared at the same maps with very different feelings. Anger, fear, a sense of loss they didn't yet know how to name. This was no longer just about Nigeria, or terror, or even Russia. It was about a world where choices were multiplying, where old levers no longer worked, where Africa was no longer waiting to be chosen. And that, more than anything else, was what made them furious.